Welcome to the Irresistible Marketing Pod, the podcast that wants you to know you don't have to heal your whole entire childhood as a prerequisite for making money. You can be depressed and rake in the sales. You can be anxious and attract dream-aligned clients. Just so you know. I'm your host, Isa Gauchi, your marketing confidence cheerleader and owner of the Isa Messaging digital marketing agency for small business baddies such as yourself. So manifestation is our topic today, and it is hot right now. From top business coaches to celebrities to mental health professionals, it seems like everyone is talking about it. And on the one hand, I love it because learning about manifestation has helped me to envision a bigger and better life than I realized was possible for me. But on the other hand, many popular teachings about manifestation often skirt or go full-on toxic positivity, often assigning individual blame to systemic problems. This I don't like. And when it comes to money, those of us who inhabit identities that have been historically shut out of wealth tend to have a lot of belief building to do around our ability to earn a living without working ourselves into the ground or accepting deeply unfair exchange for our labor. For those of us working through our money issues as we build businesses, I believe money manifestation can be both a hugely helpful tool and a deeply problematic way to blame ourselves for money wounds, depending on how you look at it. So the brilliant Samara Kasai stopped by the Irresistible Marketing Pod to help me sort through the nuance of how to use manifestation in a way that helps rather than hurts. The founder of Kasai Thrive, Samara, is a manifestation and business coach and self-healing mentor with a unique trauma-informed approach. I am so grateful to them for sharing their wisdom, and I know you'll love this episode as much as I do. Enjoy. Well, hello, Samara. Thank you so much for coming on the Irresistible Marketing Pod.
Hi, Isa. Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited when I heard that you had reached out to the team to get me on.
I am on a kick of inviting all my favorite podcasters on, and I love your show, Cozy Co-Creation. It's been like my go-to listen for my dog walk because it always makes me feel like, oh, I don't have to change who I am to get what I want. I can just reframe some stuff. So shout out, don't worry, this will be linked in the show notes. But before we get right into all of the juicy stuff I want to ask you about, would you mind introducing yourself to the good people?
Sure. So, hi, everyone. I am Samara Kasai. I am a business mentor, a self-healing guide, and a manifestation coach. So, those are the things that I love to do the most.
So I am so excited to talk with you today about manifestation. I love your approach. So we're both in kind of a coaching woo-woo-ish space, I think, where manifestation, especially in terms of money and sales, is talked about a whole lot.
Mhm.
For people who this might be a new concept for, could you let us know what is manifestation? Yeah, let's just start there. What is it?
This is really funny because I was re-listening to my podcast and I was listening to an episode where I was kind of saying, everyone has their own different definition of manifestation and everyone is just going to share what makes sense to them. And while that can be really confusing if you're hearing a lot of different definitions of the same thing, I think it's actually really valuable that we take the time to figure out what something means for us. So with all of that framing, I will share what manifestation has meant for me. And I encourage everyone listening to reflect on if that resonates with them and to reflect on if there's anything else that they would like add or change about that in terms of their own experience. But for me, manifestation has looked like teaming up with the universe to co-create things that maybe don't feel logical or that would feel impossible given like the way mainstream society is set up or the way that I was brought up to think about myself or given like different traumas that I've had in the past, really finding ways to use my spiritual practice to kind of plow through all of that and still create a life that feels meaningful and authentic and really fulfilling to me.
I love that definition. Like one thing that I feel like when I first started hearing about manifestation, it was equal parts of very uncomfortable. And then also, like, I like that it's helping me imagine stuff I might not have given myself permission before to think of as a possibility for me. Uh,
Mhm.
we're going to get into all of the the nitty-gritty details about that. I'm so excited. But you specifically call your approach trauma-informed perspective to manifestation. What would you say are the main differences between the way you teach about manifestation and what some more mainstream approaches and to teaching about manifestation are?
That's a really great question. So, there's like the long-winded answer, and you'll have to like moderate me on time because I feel like I can talk a lot about this. There's the long-winded answer, and then there's the like very concise answer. So maybe I'll start with kind of the concise answer, and then if you have follow-up questions, we can like untangle from there. Does that sound good?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So basically, I feel like generally when you look up manifestation, one of the things that's going to come up is the law of attraction, right? Which is this idea that, good thoughts create good realities and bad thoughts create bad realities. And, your the way that you feel is going to be reflected back to you in terms of your circumstances. So that is the framework by which a lot of people teach manifestation. That's what's taught in that movie, The Secret. That is like, the most mainstream way to learn about manifestation that there is, the movie and the book. But for me, what I have found is that working with trauma survivors and being a trauma survivor myself, that can lead us to really blame ourselves for the way that we're thinking and feeling and make that mean that we are creating like even up to like make that mean that we created trauma and brought trauma upon ourselves by not being in like the right vibration and by not thinking the right way. So that's kind of like one extreme of how that can go really wrong. But even beyond the like, are you going to start blaming yourself for your trauma? Just this idea that like, for my example with PTSD, I used to really experience these intense flashbacks of traumatic events. And then I would worry that, like, oh my God, have I been like, this idea of like what you hold in your mind is like what comes forward to you. So, me having this flashback for like, 10 minutes, is that going to mean that I am like actively manifesting like this traumatic event to like repeat itself into my life? And it became this like really stressed out thing where my trauma responses and my healing journey didn't really have space to be. And I felt like they were always competing with my ability to manifest the life that I wanted. And so I was kind of going through all of this for myself. And I was also in a grad program studying trauma informed care and different applications of trauma informed care. So I started to kind of put the principles of trauma informed care together with what I was learning about manifestation. And I found that that was just a lot more effective for me. And it just felt a lot more sustainable for me in terms of like, I can see myself doing this forever if this is the way that I'm going to do it. And so that's how I kind of came to this realization of what trauma informed manifestation could look like.
I appreciate that so much because I think there's like some catchphrases we hear a lot. So like the law of attraction, and then one that's coming into mind for me is your thoughts create your reality.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one
Or
too.
like, how do you know if you're um thinking effectively or you have a good mindset? Like look around, do you like your life? These are like some of the concepts and phrases that are like very popular. Um,
Mhm.
and they make me so nervous for what that says to people who have like chronic pain or mental illness or this stuff that like we really didn't choose but can make it really hard to like be looking at everything through rose tinted glasses when that's going on.
Mhm.
So bringing a trauma informed perspective to manifestation, how does that shift these concepts like law of attraction and your thoughts create your reality?
So I think the main shift for me was that I knew that I couldn't position the healing journey as like a means to an end in the manifestation process. So a lot of people who subscribe to law of attraction will make it seem like, well, you have to like heal and clear all of your like quote unquote negative thoughts because your negative thoughts are what create, you know, the reality that you don't want. So you have to get rid of all of them. Or some will say like you have to think positive at least 50% of the time or whatever. And the whole goal is like notice when you're thinking incorrectly, quote unquote, and then fix it as much as you can. And in terms of the trauma informed care perspective, the basic principle of trauma informed care is that you want to prevent re traumatization. And so if you tell someone to like vigilantly watch their mind and then try to like manipulate all of their thoughts to be a certain way, that can actually really be re-traumatizing for people. And so the first thing that I started with was like, what does it look like to just not believe in the concept of limiting beliefs at all and just let myself think and feel however I'm organically thinking and feeling, not making it an issue, and then actually just focusing on connecting to the vision for what I wanted to create for my life and practicing letting that feel real and approachable and accessible to me, regardless of like if I was having intrusive thoughts that day or like whatever, if my trauma responses were flaring up, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I remember having the thought like I'm not a manifestation expert, but I think a lot of this gets like caught up in talking about abundance versus scarcity mindset. And it occurred to me one day that like if some of your thoughts aren't okay, then isn't that scarcity?
Ooh,
You
I
know?
love that perspective. I hadn't thought about that, but that feels so true. Like, why are we creating like this really small window of things that are acceptable and like cutting things out? I love that.
Yeah, because if like in my body, it feels more abundant to be like, what if all of my thoughts are okay? And I just get to choose how I want to respond to them.
Yes, yes. Ooh, I love that because it definitely, for me, when I'm thinking about it, it feels a lot more expansive to just welcome and embrace and like hold space for all of my thoughts and all of my feelings. And that does feel like an expansion for me. And so it does feel kind of contractive and like scarce to start narrowing down the window of things. Like in trauma informed care, we call it the window of tolerance. Like what can you deem as acceptable before you start perceiving it as like a threat or not okay or like a situation you're trying to escape from. And so it's kind of like in the law of attraction world, you're making your window of tolerance like really small. And that does feel like contracting and scarce when you think about it that way.
Yeah. So how, from your perspective, if like your thoughts are just your thoughts, okay, they have no effect on manifesting, how do you manifest stuff?
So for me, I mean, it's like I have a whole program on it, but the top line things that I like to remind people is a lot of people who are trauma survivors who get into manifestation, they start focusing a lot on like what they shouldn't be doing and what they need to like eliminate and like watching themselves for like, oh, you're doing that wrong and that's fucking you up and like that's what you need to blame yourself for. And so a very easy shift is starting to actively bias yourself and noticing like what are the thoughts that I have that are helpful? What are situations that I'm in where I feel safe and where I actually feel empowered? And like, where do I see myself exercising agency? Where do I see that, you know, my choices do have an impact on my life and I can affect my life positively? And just starting to orient yourself to see yourself in that direction, like to see yourself as a person who is consciously improving your situation and who's capable of doing that. Because what that does with the mind is that your reticular activating system, which is kind of like the matchmaker of the brain, it's going to start finding more evidence that you are that person, and it's going to start pointing you towards opportunities that were probably like in front of you all the time that you just like wrote off because you didn't see yourself as the kind of person who could move in that direction, or you didn't think that like you taking any step in that direction would have any kind of impact anyway, so you're just like glazing over it. The more you can remind yourself and notice any little moment of like, actually, I made that choice and it did go well for me, or I did that thing and it did positively impact my situation, the more you'll start seeing those choices present themselves and the more you'll be able to walk through those doors. So that's like a very basic, but I think also something very practical that people can start to use to think about manifestation in a different way. Does that make sense?
Totally. I love that. So it's not about like restriction or cutting off the bad parts of your brain or
Right.
changing who you are. It's like choosing out of the abundance of thoughts you have, what do we want to lean into? What do we want to focus on?
Yes, exactly. I was telling a client recently, it's kind of like a buffet. Like you literally have it all available to you, and you choose obviously what you focus on, but you also choose what you integrate into your self concept. And if you can start to conceptualize yourself as someone who really I see manifestation as a way to have agency over your life. And that's why I think it can be so powerful for trauma survivors is like a lot of trauma comes from people taking your agency away or like a perceived lack of agency. And so the more that you can find ways to be an agent of change in your own situation, I think the better. I think that's like why this can be really powerful. But in terms of if you see all of your thoughts as a buffet and it's like, I'm going to actively put on my plate like thoughts that remind me of a time when I did have power, of a time when I was listened to, of a time when I felt, a sense of belonging or whatever. Like anytime I made a choice or did a thing that moved my situation forward, then those are just going to be the thoughts that your mind is actively trying to confirm all the time?
Oh, I love that. Which it leads me into wanting to ask you about a program which I love that you named it Moody and Magnetic. And I was noticing in my circles, there's this fear for a lot of entrepreneurs, like if I'm depressed, I won't be able to attract sales, or like if I'm
Mm.
anxious, I can't get money. Um, I'm haven't been in the program, hoping to someday. Like for people that have those fears, why was it important for you to like put it right in the name? You can be moody and magnetic, and how do you help them connect those dots?
So this is really funny because the name Moody and Magnetic honestly came to me before I knew that it was going to be a program. I was doing this exercise that now I take my clients through where I just call it like my reset exercise. There's no like fancy name for it, but it's really just when I like will brain dump about a situation that's frustrating to me. I'll get pretty clear on like what are the aspects of it that are frustrating, and then I'll just ask myself like if I could perceive this situation in any way whatsoever, how would I choose to perceive it? And I was journaling, and the thing that was frustrating me was like my manifestation practice feels really draining, and it feels like all I'm doing is looking at my thoughts and telling them that they're bad and arguing with myself. And I just feel like it's so much emotional labor. And what am I even getting from this? And like I was just journaling about how frustrating it was. And then I was like, well, how do I want to perceive the situation? And I was like, I want to feel like I can be moody and magnetic at the same time. And then I was just like, I didn't really do anything with it because that was like a year before the program ever got created. But I was like, oh, this is like really good for me. And I'm going to carry this around as like a reminder for myself?
Oh, I love that. And how did you like get all your parts and your body on board? Like, I can be moody and magnetic. I can be depressed and get sales. I can be having a bad mental health day and be rich. Like,
Mm.
what was the process like getting yourself to believe in it, I guess?
That's a good question. And I'm thinking back because, like I said, this was 2021, but I'm honestly so happy that you asked this question. And I love when people encourage me to think back to like the origin of the program and how it came about because I really was depressed. I was very depressed. I was going through something with my family. I was going through something with my ex's like there was like two big like family conflicts happening at once. And I already like had PTSD and didn't have a therapist because I like didn't have the money for a therapist. I was like in like one of the more challenging mental health places I've probably ever been in. And I had this business that I really, really cared about and I wanted to grow it. And I needed to basically get myself out of this place where I felt like my mental health was the reason my business wasn't growing. And one of the things that helped me the most with getting myself on board was reminding myself that making money is a skill. It's not like a reward. And I still tell that to my clients now, like manifestation, it like for me, I came from a very like punitive household with my parents. I also came from Christianity, which is like very reward punishment, literally down to like heaven and hell kind of a vibe. So I tend to, if I am left unchecked, I view things from a reward punishment framework, and I have to kind of like notice myself about that. And so I was like, okay, making money is not a reward. That's why I still tell people like it's not a cosmic report card. When your bank account looks a certain way, it's not like you're getting an A from the universe, right? Like, and when I stopped seeing it as like this is something either the universe is saying yes, you're good, or like no, you're bad, you can't have any clients, it became easier for me to just focus on like, okay, what are the skills involved in making money? And with whatever little energy I have each day, how can I put that energy into just building that skill set from a very neutral place of like, this is something I can learn how to do. And so again, it was just a lot of like untangling, and it can be hard because we get so much messaging of like, you know, if you need to control all of your thoughts in order to quote unquote manifest, right? And if, you know, the people who are the most famous manifestation teachers are also people who are like, you know, I have all of these like hundreds of thousands of clients. And then it becomes like, well, those people must just be like the people that the universe cares about the most, or the people who are like the most blessed, or like whatever. And that was also something I was journaling about, where I was like, I feel like the universe just like doesn't see me. Like it's just like the universe, I'm like like not showing up on the universe's like dashboard. Like I'm like, hey, I'm here too. But when I let it stop feeling so like nebulous, and when I was just like, oh, like these people are making money because they have either themselves the skills or their team members have the skills to like bring money into their businesses, it just became a lot easier for me to do those things, you know?
I love that. Yeah, like there's I feel like for money, making money, some aspect is like you just carry the bucket of water, you know. I do
Yeah.
have sales superstitions though, because I feel like some of the biggest sales I've got are the sales that like, oh, thank goodness I can like I thought I was gonna be in trouble this month have come when I'm like, I'm just gonna bake a pie this afternoon, or like I'm going to swim in the river. Like I feel like I've had enough of those moments where I'm starting to get superstitious about it. And at
Ooh.
first I thought it was like the vibe, like, oh, okay, so money comes in when I'm in the relaxed vibe. And now I'm like,
Mm.
was was it that, or I'd carried the water enough and then I went and took care of myself?
You know, I personally, because I've had those situations too, where like, you know, the day that I take off and don't do any work is the day that like multiple people sign up for the thing I'm launching or like whatever. And it can be easy to get superstitious about things like that. But the the thing that I've come to is exactly what you've said. Like I carried the water enough, and moderating like with the carrying of the water, which I'm assuming you're meaning, you know, just like the day to day of running the business, putting yourself out there, making people aware of what you do and how you can help them and all that, the marketing, you know, aspects. um, I always feel like whenever I look back and I'm like, oh my God, how did that happen? Like I was telling the story of someone referred a client to me who then bought a course that I wasn't even selling or ever planning to sell again, but for some reason the link still worked. And then that person went through the course and then became a private client. And I was just like, what the hell? Like I did no work and all of this happened. But then I was like, honestly, that course that the person bought, that she was referred into, that course actually did have a lot of effort put into it when I was trying to sell it, and that effort just continued to like pay off over time in ways that I couldn't have predicted. But it's not like if I had said nothing about this course ever in my life, I don't think anyone would have just been randomly referred into the course. And if the course itself wasn't like so powerful, that person wouldn't have been like, oh, now I'm going to become a private client. You know, like there were things that led to things.
Ooh, yes. Oh, I love that. Because I was just listening to an episode of your podcast where you talked about part of like your journey to really feel like you believed in manifestation was to let go of the timeline. Um,
Mhm.
how does that tie into you can be depressed and still do the things that make you money? But like, yeah, let me know.
Okay. Okay, this is good because I actually I want everyone listening, if you have time and a chance, I have an episode called Selling While Anxious, which is a similar vibe, like a similar flavor of what you're asking. I think depression is obviously very different than anxiety. Because with depression, it's like you're low energy, and with anxiety, you might be like even over exerting because you are like in that panic. So with depression, which I haven't spoken about on the podcast, for me, it feels like allowing it to all add up over time. And it also feels like asking myself like a hard prioritization of if I'm only going to do three things today, what are the three things that are going to move me forward the most? And actually, sometimes in those seasons of my life, like I went through a breakup recently where I was like very depressed for weeks. And I got to the point where like I wasn't doing anything, and then my income was like zeroing. It wasn't zeroing out in terms of going to zero, but it was like just reoccurring money and no new sales were coming in. And I was like, I am not super comfortable with this. I'm going to figure this out. But also, if I can only do like one to two things a day and still raise my income, like what can I do? And I started just getting really creative. Like I was like, okay, I don't have to do a whole launch. Like I have a bunch of people who are about to finish Moody and Magnetic. Why don't I just open one-on-one up to them? And then three of those people came into one-on-one. And then I was like, okay, cool, we're good. Like I did one thing, but it was also, I did one thing that was the benefit of that whole 4 month course that we did together. And also that whole like 2 month launch that we did to get the people into the 4 month course. So it was like, I allowed the things I had already done to add up for me so that in a moment where I didn't have a lot of energy, I could still like benefit from that, you know?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I think yeah, there's like two di directions I want to go. So, like, one, I wanted to ask about timeline because I thought you made such a good point. I'll just use it an example. Like, everybody in the online world is like, one of those first big milestones is like, I want the 10K month. And
Mm-hmm.
then you like get into manifestation, you take a program and you do all the journaling, you do all the visualization, and then it doesn't happen.
Mm.
You're like, well, maybe this doesn't work for me. Um, what is your response to those people? Like, because you said something about being like, I feel like the universe just didn't, or it felt like the universe just didn't see me, and like maybe what works for the universe just likes them better or whatever. What do you
Mhm.
say for people who didn't manifest the thing they wanted to manifest in the timeline they wanted?
Yes. Oh my God. And also like everyone feels this way. Literally, um, anyway, everyone feels this way. And for me, again, one of the things that I like to talk about with people is this idea of the stages of belief. And I will go into this. I don't want to like, well, we'll see where this goes. Because I was like, I do want to make sure I answer your question directly. And if I say stuff and it's like, you didn't answer the question, Samara, like ask me again. But the thing this is bringing up for me is the stages of belief, because there is a process by which we come to like get behind something, for lack of a better way to say it. And so it starts off as like this is impossible, then it becomes like this is like possible, but you know, who knows if it'll really happen, and then this is probable. And then I used to teach that the last stage was like inevitable, so like impossible, possible, probable, inevitable. And then as I was like practicing this for myself and doing it with clients, I realized that there were two more stages, which are imminent, which is like, you know, about to happen, and then also like complete. And those are actually belief stages that we can like work on. And there's a difference between believing something is like inevitable and just like meant to happen, but still kind of could happen inevitably, but whenever, versus this is like about to happen now. And I learned this because I was working with a client who had told me that they believed that it was inevitable that their business would make six figures like this year, 2024, but we were talking about it like in the end of 2023. And I was like, well, if you believe it's inevitable your business will make six figures in 2024, why don't we like raise your goal a little bit? Because like the point of coaching is to like help you do things that are beyond what you already believe. And she was like, well, okay, I believe it's inevitable that it will happen, but I don't know if I believe it'll happen in 2024. And I was like, oh, interesting. Because you can start to like believe in something, but this idea of like the time sensitivity piece is actually a different way of thinking about it. And so one of the things that I started to work on with her, and then I also have like brought like I'm redoing the Moody and Magnetic curriculum to like include this, is like if this thing were to actually happen like right now, what would you what would need to change? Like, do you feel like you have everything in place to support the thing occurring like, imminently? And if there are like things that need to change in terms of, for example, with the 10K month, like if that would mean suddenly you have way too many clients and you can't even like eat or sleep, like maybe you don't have the scalability to actually hold a 10K month yet. And what you actually need to do is focus on creating the conditions for this thing to happen right away and acting as if it's about to happen right away, you know?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I just had an insight.
Ooh.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like if you're in that energy, like, well, if my manifestation didn't manifest in the month that I decided needed to be a 10K month, then I don't believe in manifestation anymore. That's like totally taking your agency away. You're like, prove it to
Mm.
the universe. This is on you, you know?
Yeah.
Like, this is on you. I'm not going to believe in it. And then the way you're talking about the stages of belief is like when you get to the point where you're making stuff happen, you're literally making it happen. Like you're setting the conditions for it to be able to happen. Like you're taking on the responsibility to make it happen for yourself.
Yes, exactly. Because I think like believing that you get to experience a thing, I think that is a stepping stone. Because if you don't even think that it's like within your realm at all, then you're definitely not going to do anything for it. But like going back to this idea of like it's not like a reward that's like bestowed upon you. Like all these people that you see that are like, I have made a gazillion dollars, they have like giant companies where people work really hard to have them make a gazillion dollars, you know?
Yes, totally. So I'm wondering if we could switch gears a little bit because since you are the trauma-informed manifestation expert, I wanted one thing I realize I always feel really crunchy about when I hear kind of non-intersectional manifestation teachings
Mhm.
is I do like the agency and helping people to feel empowered and more is possible for them. What
Mhm.
worries me is when it's like, but we're not going to talk about things like racism or sexism or a
Yeah.
wage gap or the denial of historical wealth. So I'm curious for people that come in with that baggage where they're like, yo, I know that my thoughts didn't just create a lack of generational wealth before I
Right.
was even born.
Right.
How do you help them kind of reconcile? Yes, you do have agency to make this stuff happen, and yet we live in this world with these systems and these injustices.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So, um, obviously, I mean, not to say obviously, but one of the principles of trauma informed care is actually that you have to take systemic trauma into account. So it's not just like what did your parents say to you or whatever, which of course can be and often is informed by these systems of oppression, like people parent in ways that perpetuate these ways of thinking, but also like the broader concept of yourself that society reinforces on a day to day can often be traumatic if you are a marginalized person. So, what I like to tell people in this case, and especially what's coming to mind to share now, is, and this is something that I've always done, but I think it's because actually, I don't know why. I have no idea why. But something that I've always done is I've always surrounded myself with examples of people who were doing things even in spite of the situation that they were in, the privileges that they didn't have, and like the systems of oppression that were like set up to stop them. And so Oprah has always been a really big one for me. Um, I used to be really into learning about like Maya Angelou, like people who they were not really set up well at all to succeed. And I learn a lot about like their perspectives on life and what choices they made that helped them see themselves differently, even in light of like the awful situations that they were in and the ways that they were told to think about themselves. Like, Oprah's grandmother was basically like, my biggest dream for you is that the white family that you end up being a maid for inevitably will not like mistreat you. Like, oh, that was the dream on Oprah's life. And the fact that Oprah is now like this like thought leader, billionaire, like, pinnacle of like success and all of this, like she really it's not because it was going to be easy for her or because society like rolled out the red carpet for her at all. And if you really study her, like she tells so many examples of like when she was first getting onto TV and they made her straighten her hair all the time and then all her hair fell out, like so many just like racist things that were happening with her. And yet she was still able to kind of figure it out for herself and become the person who she felt called to become, and live the life that she felt called to live. And so studying, like finding examples that resonate with you and studying those examples is always a good way to kind of just remind yourself that things are possible besides just what society is telling you. But then there also can come a time where relying on examples can pigeonhole you. So like, for example, I'm non-binary and we don't have a lot of representation of non-binary people being really much of anything because we don't have examples of non-binary people being represented. And so I did get to a point where I was like, okay, I really like the Oprah example or just like different people, Shonda Rhimes, like whoever that I resonate with. But then this idea of, and also I'm genderqueer and that is going to impact my journey to one extent or the other. But I think I got to the point where I was like, I'm okay with going first in certain ways as well. And I started to reframe it for myself of like, I am willing to be the example of what's possible, even if that means that like my path is going to be a little bit more windy and less linear. And I'm going to have to like, and I do navigate a lot of like gender related stuff in my day to day as like people are learning about my brand and not knowing. Like I was on a different podcast where they were like, what is a non-binary femme? And that was like one of the questions, and I was like, I'm happy to answer this question because I want people to get it and to understand that like if they too are non-binary, that's not going to stop them from being seen and being visible and being invited into spaces and all of that. So it's kind of like the two things of seeing those examples, normalizing them for yourself, and then being okay with going first sometimes.
Oh, that is so good. Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. And I think like a lot of what we're talking about here is that when we're talking about money, trauma's going to come up for like,
Yes.
I feel like most people, but especially if you have any sort of intersecting marginalized identities.
Mm-hmm.
So I know so in my group, the squad this month, we're really focused on pricing. And I think I told you in like the pre-interview email that um like everybody's questions were emotional. Like nobody really had strategic or tactical questions. Like the biggest things that were coming up was the emotions around like setting boundaries about access to our work.
Uh-huh.
And when we talk about these things, like grief comes up, like rage comes up with this just kind of realization of how much our financial lives have been impacted by these systems,
Mm.
and these bodies we were born into, etc. So I'm curious, whether does this kind of thing come up for your clients as well? And how do you help them be like, oh, how do you help them process those heavy feelings around money while at the same time trying to call in money?
Yes. So to clarify your question, are you asking if I have support and thoughts around like pricing specifically or like money more broadly? Because I
Oh,
could talk to
both.
either one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd love your thoughts on both. Just choose where you want to start.
Okay, cool. So money stuff obviously always comes up, we live in this world where money is kind of like it's almost like portrayed in a traumatizing way. It's like very hard to be a human on the planet and not have some kind of trauma attached to money. One thing that I always remind people is that it's not that you have to heal every single money, like every single like traumatic money memory needs to like instantly be healed overnight in order for you to make money and see traction and like call money into your business. I think that's a really big misconception. And for me, a lot of my trauma was money related when I was growing up. And I did have this weird feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to have to literally heal my entire childhood if I'm ever going to make any money. And it was like so daunting. Um, and I think one thing that has always helped is seeing healing as like parallel to manifestation, not like one has to happen before the other, which I think I talked about a little bit, like not making healing a means to an end. Trusting your healing journey to unfold, continuing to show up and heal your relationship with money, like for the sake of having a healthy relationship with money, and remembering that money it's worth it in its own right to have a healthy relationship with money because money is everywhere and every day we are doing some kind of transaction with money. And so the more we can make money feel fun and expansive and supportive and like be in touch with the ways that money is a positive thing, it just improves our quality of life in general. And so I start to reframe money more as like, for the sake of your mental health, like it's nice to have a healthy relationship with money. And then again, going back to what I had said earlier, making money is a skill. And obviously people who are working with you, you all have conversations about like the skills related to making money, but people need to keep it in mind, like healing your relationship with money is important because you want to be healthy and have a high quality of life and just like, feel well when you're dealing with money. And your ability to make money is a lot more about whether you trust yourself to build the skills required to make the money?
That is such a good point. And like it is totally possible to be having your grief and rage about your financial history surface while still doing things like marketing effectively or telling people
Yes.
about your offer. Like both things can exist at the same time. And just because you are experiencing the grief and the anger and the rage and the sadness around this, doesn't mean you can't be simultaneously manifesting money, is what we're saying. Yeah.
Right, right, exactly. And actually, as you're talking about this, there's one thing that I hope people will take away too is like manifestation to me feels more focused on the future and what you are creating, and then healing is like the past. And I try to keep those two things as like, not to say separate, but really I see them as like distinct. Like when I'm doing healing work, I'm working on my relationship with like the past and how I'm bringing that into the present. And when I'm working on manifestation, it's like I'm thinking about the future that I'm choosing to create, the person I'm choosing to become, and then looking at like what are the resources I have in the present that can help me move forward towards that future?
Oh, that's beautiful. I hadn't thought of it like that. Yes, so healing is reconciling the past, manifestation is future focused. And so you can be future focused without having unpacked your entire childhood.
Exactly. And there's like definitely a time and a place for each thing?
Totally. And I think like where it can get confused is something like pricing, which I'm excited to get your thoughts on, where you might be trying to be future focused, but you are getting dragged back into stuff that's been unresolved for your past, is what I'm guessing. But tell me your thoughts. I can't wait to hear.
Well, okay, I kind of have a clarifier. So, in terms of pricing, what's a situation where someone would feel like the past coming up around pricing?
Yeah, I think just like naming the price for a coaching program, say,
Mhm.
or like I'll give you a few issues like my squad members are having
Yeah, for sure.
some stuff like so one is just like literally being allowed to name your price and having that be like this is brand new for me. I've never been allowed to do that before. What if no one thinks I'm worth this? What if no one buys because it's too expensive? Kind of like there's that bucket. And then the other bucket is like more my service providers who are like, I named the price, we signed a contract, and now they're trying to get more work out of me without paying for it, are like two of the big ones that are coming up for my people.
Yes. Okay. Both of those things deserve to be spoken to for sure. Um, so I think the person with they named the price, they have the contract signed, now the person's trying to expand the scope. That to me feels like working on boundaries.
Mhm.
Because obviously that can be triggering if you have, any traumatic experience where you feel like someone is trying to override your boundaries and take advantage of you, or in any way like have you do things that you didn't initially agree to do. Like all of that can be very triggering. And in instances where that's been happening with clients of mine, or even when that's been happening in my business, I don't respond right away. Like I take a moment, and even if I need like a few days, like I've done this before where I'm like, okay, I received your email. I am going to take a few days and I'll get back to you. And then I'll let myself really just like remember that this person is not actually like, they are in a relationship with me, but what they're in a relationship with is my business, and that's defined by this contract. And that helps me not feel like I am personally being asked to overextend myself, like in a way where trauma is very personal. It's like, oh, this person is just not honoring the agreement that they have made with my business. And so it like gives me a degree of separation. And often once I get to that place in my mind, it becomes easier to just firmly communicate like, okay, given, and I'll even say, like, given the agreement that you have with my business, this is the scope of like what we can accommodate providing. I also always recommend everyone say we, even if you don't have a team, because it just takes you, it separates you personally from the whole situation. So I like saying we, and everyone can steal that, even if you don't have a team. This is the scope of like what we have the bandwidth to do right now, given what your contract is. And then depending on how your business is set up, if it's like, if you want to add these on, like we can expand the contract and that costs X amount more. But also if you want to just be like, we do not have the bandwidth to expand the scope of the project, like it just keeps it really clean, you know?
I love that. And then we is also kind of like me and my business
Right, exactly. Like
entities.
my business and I talked about it and we can't make it happen.
I love that. Yeah, and then I'm wondering if manifestation plays in here by being like, well, how do I want to be spending my time moving forward? And then having that inform what you do today.
Yes, exactly. Because I also will think about like, I mean, what I do actually, how this plays into my manifestation practice is when I am manifesting new clients in to things where they're going to be doing like kind of contract services with me. I, and this is the thing that some manifestation teachers will tell you is not good, but I always do it. Like when they say like, don't use a negative, like don't use something that you don't want, because even if you're saying like, I want to be not broke, all the universe is getting out of that is like broke, broke, broke. I do not subscribe to that. I had an energy teacher tell me like really early on that that was like trash and not true. And so I decided to just roll with that not being true. And so when I'm manifesting new clients, I always have an example of like a client that I loved that was like amazing. And then a client who was like this, who was like always trying to like get more and not pay. And I was like, literally, universe, whatever needs to happen so that there are boundaries around these kinds of people coming in, and so that we are like actively drawing more of like the like enjoyable clients in, like what does that manifestation need to look like? Like that's how I'm directing it. So that's how I'll bring it into manifestation kind of on the back end of that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
How did
Um
you keep them out and welcome these people in?
yes,
Okay, I
please.
love that. Yeah, and then what do you, for the folks who want to manifest money, but they're having all this like self-worth get tied into it when they're asked to like literally name the price for their work. What do you tell them?
So this is more of my business hat on, is just like, honestly, with pricing, people don't realize you can always change it, and there's nothing wrong with changing it. I think I mean, well, there's a lot to say, but like, first of all, I don't necessarily see my products, my courses, etc., as like me. So if I'm like, this is worth this much, I'm not saying like I am worth this much. It's very much like the price that I'm putting on this thing that is very external to me is this. Like it seems very like separate to me. But I think there is an aspect of kind of learning how to see yourself as separate from your work, especially if your work is very vulnerable and emotional, and like all of my work is from my own like really hard learned personal experiences. And so there is an art to kind of like, at one point this was me because it's literally like the life that I lived to learn these lessons and this wisdom that I have. But at this point, once it becomes a product, it's not me anymore. This is like a separate thing. It's like a something that I'm putting out into the world. So separating your sense of self from the work. And then again, it's like when people, because I haven't ever heard of a business owner who's been doing this like and really like putting themselves out there, who've never had the experience of someone being like, oh, actually I can't afford that, or like that's too expensive, or like whatever. And a lot of us can fear getting that response, especially if we grew up in an environment where we're always being told like, no, that's too expensive, no, that's too expensive, no, that's too expensive. And then you're like getting that back to you as like an adult who's a business owner or whatever. And it can be very triggering. But I think in those moments, what has helped me the most, going back to the like skill based thing, is how can I really make it a point to market to the people for whom this price is a match? You know, like if this is going to be, so for example, with Moody and Magnetic, actually, it's now 12 months. It was previously 4 months. So that means that the price has gone up. And I am actively marketing to people who you are comfortable with being on a healing journey already, you're comfortable with manifestation already, you're actively in it, and it would make sense to you that you would commit, like you would make a 12-month commitment to this because it's something you've already made important to you. And it makes sense that you would pay this higher price point because it's like you're used to investing in your healing, you're used to investing in your growth, and you see yourself as someone who's going to be on this journey forever. So if something is like, this is 12 months and it's lifetime access for you, you're like, yeah, it makes sense that it's this price. But before, I was marketing Moody and Magnetic as like, if you've never done manifestation before, if you're skeptical of manifestation, like all these things of like, you know, this can be an entry point for people into manifestation. But I know that with the way the program has expanded, I would be getting a ton of like, I can't afford that, I can't afford that, if I was still marketing it in that way and trying to charge the amount that it is now. So it's kind of like remembering that there is a skill and a science to all of this too.
Ooh, yes. I'm also thinking like in the manifestation frame, if like you're tying up the price you're putting on your work with your value as a human, what you're trying to manifest is like validation for your worth as a person. Um,
Yes.
which
Yes.
not to get too spiritual, but I feel like whenever I've done that, the universe has like been like, nope, stripping all that away because you have to give that to yourself.
Yes, I was just thinking, I was like, that is something you're gonna have to learn how to give for yourself, because especially with business, the relationships in business, they can't be tied up in your sense of self. That is a very unsustainable way to relate to your business.
Absolutely. So if you think that, so if you think you're calling in sales, but what you're really calling in is feeling like you are valuable as a person, the
Yeah.
universe is probably not going to give you sales. It's probably going to be like, how do we make you focus on this?
Right. Like, let's figure this out first. And also, like, pricing as if the price is gonna correlate to your worth as a person. I think that can also just feel so daunting because it's like, what number do you even pick if it's like if it's supposed to reflect your worth as a human being, you know?
Totally. And I love the example you used with Moody and Magnetic, because in this instance, when you're like, no, I'm actually trying to manifest sales from a specific type of customer at a specific price point, then you can take the actions that would actually get you to manifest that.
Right. Because
Yes.
I'm very clear on like this is what's happening versus like I need this launch to validate me. So how can I like game the numbers so that I feel super validated at the end?
Yeah, because then you'd be tempted, like, because then in the first instance where you're like, I need the sales to validate me as a person, then you'd be real tempted to like be very accommodating, people please everybody, make everybody like you, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
Then it's really hard to have stuff like boundaries around, actually, that's not included in the contract.
Yes, exactly. And I have definitely done that in the past where I can look back and I'm like, the person who's asking me to expand the scope of the contract all the time is also usually someone who I was like way accommodating in terms of like I'm thinking of one particular person where it was like I had a specific like sale going on. The sale ended. The next day after that, she was like, "Hey, can I get the sale price even though the sale ended?" And I totally could have been like, "No, actually the sale ended." But I was like, "No, sure, for sure." And then every like couple of weeks she was like, "Can you add this? Can you expand this? blah blah blah." And I was like, I see how I let you think that I was just gonna like expand everything because I initially overextended to even have you be a client in the first place.
Ooh, yeah. So it's like I was like literally just talking with an awesome codependency coach about this, about setting the expectations for the code of contact
Mm.
at the beginning. And if you violate your own boundaries at the very start, like what do you think is going to happen
Honestly,
after
it's so
that?
brilliant.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I just saw the time.
Oh,
Samara,
ooh, wow.
yeah, so good. Thank you so much for shedding so much wisdom on this podcast. How can people follow you and work with you moving forward? And don't worry, folks, this is all the links and stuff will be in the show notes as well.
Okay. Amazing. Also, thank you so much for having me, Issa. This hour literally flew by, and that is saying something because today was off to a slow start for me. So I loved this conversation. Anyone can find me on Instagram. I'm at Samara Kasai, so same as my name. And then, depending on when this comes out, I mean, the Moody and Magnetic it'll either be the wait list or the course is open. So that'll be a thing that's like most related to this conversation. And then I believe I gave you a freebie as well, right? Exhale, scarcity, inhale, abundance. So that's a breath and meditation bundle just to help you heal your relationship with scarcity in any area of your life.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can find all the links for how to follow and work with Samara and myself in the show notes. If you loved this episode, make sure to tag Samara and me on social media when you post about your takeaways. You'll find all of our handles in the show notes. And as always, don't forget to drop me some stars and share this fabulous free resource with all of your entrepreneur friends. And if you'd like to learn some marketing and sales skills that you can implement regardless of how moody you're feeling, I'd love to invite you to What's Working Week, April 15th through 19th, 2024. In these 5 daily business labs, I will teach you how to put your marketing metrics in context so that you can do more of what's working and less of what's not. Who doesn't want time and energy back? Who doesn't want a major confidence boost to go all in on the stuff you love and drop the stuff you don't? Check it out at the link in the show notes.